Hi folks, this is Mr. Powell with Knowable World and a new installment of History Moment. My theme today is a new cultural phenomenon that is threatening our all too fragile understanding of history. That phenomenon is the woke right. The woke right is a primarily anti-war faction that has at times been aligned with President Trump, but which is animated by an obsession with America's most recent failed wars and proposes to revise the meaning of any part of human history they see as relevant to promote what is generally called isolationism. Let's take a closer look at this new cultural player, which is a predictable facet of the emergent post-Americanistic culture I have discussed in the History of Tomorrow. As a historian and teacher, I spend a lot of time presenting and explaining the major conflicts that have defined human history. Here's just a sample of some of the most decisive battles and wars that have moved the world. The Greco-Persian Wars from circa 500 to 449 BC, in which the Greeks repelled an oversized Persian invasion in defense of classical Greek culture, saving democracy, philosophy, history, and natural science, thus facilitating the rise of Western civilization. The Battle of Chalons, circa 541 AD, in which the Roman Empire, in temporary alliance with various Germanic tribes, severely degraded the invading forces of Attila the Hun, helping to preserve European culture at its fragile inception point, thus permitting the gradual rebirth of Western civilization. The Reformation and Religious Wars from 1517 to 1648, in which the institutional monopoly of the Catholic Church in Christendom was shattered, and Europe's fate as a collection of mutually alienated separate nations was sealed. And finally, World War II, 1939 to 45, in which the aggressive super-nationalist empires of Germany and Japan were completely defeated in their aims to create massive empires, resulting in the post-war order we still, to a certain extent, live in, the defining feature of which is American primacy. When discussing these and countless other wars in history, my students know to expect that I will discuss what each of the sides stood for and why they went to war. They know to expect that I will explain why the war mattered, not just to the people of the time, but to the trajectory of history. They also know to expect that I will discuss if and when one side represented a set of cultural values that is demonstrably superior to those of the other side. In other words, they know I will talk in terms of good guys and bad guys. In the Greco-Persian Wars, the Greeks were the good guys. The Persians were not just the aggressors, but they were the bad guys, whose victory would have snuffed out democracy and humanism in favor of archaic monarchism. In the Battle of Chalons, the Romans and Europeans were the good guys. Perhaps just barely. Most were barbarians that stood for a set of cultural values they themselves barely understood. But by comparison, the Huns represented complete archaic barbarism. In the Reformation and Religious Wars, it's impossible to speak in terms of right and wrong, except in terms of religious freedom. This means that the Protestants were generally the better of the two groups, especially the Dutch, who fought for religious toleration. Although the situation is complex enough that I rarely make any sweeping statements about right and wrong in any other regard. Here, the focus has to be on outcomes and consequences, which were certainly mixed, but generally positive. World War II is, of course, a good guys versus bad guys story. There is no way to make the case that Germany or Japan had a valid moral reason for waging aggressive war, or that the Western world, however flawed, was not the overwhelmingly morally superior culture. But now we enter into the minefield of woke right revisionism. The controversy recently exploded because one of the arch representatives of the new woke right cultural trend, Tucker Carlson, gave a platform to revisionist Daryl Cooper, who proposes to rehabilitate our view of Nazi Germany while at the same time disparaging great Western leaders like Winston Churchill. What is going on here? Enough has been revealed and explained by experts on the subject for decades to inoculate most educated adults against the whitewashing of Nazi Germany. But how many such educated adults are there out there today? Given the state of history education, who can really claim to have a well-formed understanding of World War II or of the Holocaust? It's certainly not an easy subject to look at. And of course, Holocaust denialism is rampant today. As a historian and teacher, it's one of the most daunting subjects I tackle regularly. But what is at stake here is not historical reality, but public perception. That's one of the key aspects of the woke movement, whether on the left or the right. Reality always takes a back seat. Narrative, as they say, is what matters. If the woke right can begin to unravel the public perception that World War II was a just war, a war of good versus evil, then what is left of America's career as the world police power? That, my friends, is the true target. The target of woke movements, both left and right, is not the truth, but modern politics. The woke right wants to convince people that nothing America does as the world police power is good. They already have the Vietnam War to point to as a pointless war that took and ruined countless lives on both sides to no end. They also have the war on terror in Afghanistan, which resulted in the ignominious retreat of the United States and the return to power of the Taliban, and the war in Iraq, based clearly on lies, namely the dreaded prospect of WMDs being developed in Iraq, which also produced horrible outcomes, including the rise of ISIS and ultimately the toppling of the Assad regime in favor of a genocidal Islamist government. The woke right doesn't want America dragged into World War III, especially by Ukraine or Israel, or perhaps even Taiwan, as it perceives America to have been dragged into World War II by Britain. The key, of course, therefore, is to dismantle the idea that World War II was a war worth fighting. In the Knowable World program, I help students avoid being suggestible to that kind of revisionism. I show students the full context of World War II, including necessary aspects of the context in which America and Western Europe most certainly did err, such as in the appeasement of Nazi Germany and in the reliance on internationalism, and thus failed to properly serve their own interests and failed to live up to their own high moral standards. The full context that students learn, however, makes it impossible to dismiss the Holocaust as an accident or sympathize with either Imperial Japan or Nazi Germany. I teach historical empathy at Knowable World, but I do not teach moral relativism. In the Advanced History program this year, we'll even be taking a closer look at some of the Nazi ideology and the ways it cashed in on the worst of the Western intellectual tradition, from Hegel and Marx to Friedrich Nietzsche and Martin Heidegger, to generate a veritable culture of hatred and genocide that most certainly needed to be confronted and ended. As we enter into the post-Americanistic period, we will have to contend with new threats to history beyond the woke left and its vilification of all things American or Western. The woke right trend is the first to emerge, but it won't be the last. A proper history curriculum is the only antidote. A history curriculum that truly integrates the story of the world like never before and inoculates students to woke revisionism. That history curriculum is Knowable World. For more information on the Knowable World curriculum for homeschoolers, as well as the history of now and the history of tomorrow for adults, please visit knowableworld.com. Thank you, and see you again soon.